I like to say we plan when we're expecting our first baby, but we never plan to be a family caregiver.
What you've built with the All Home Care Matters, YouTube and everything else, I want you to talk to me a little bit more. Can you take us back to what made you start doing that?
So around the 8-9 year mark of having our home care company, this thing happened. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called COVID. We quickly realized this is going to be longer than just a couple of 2 weeks. I'm thinking how can we still get this stuff out to these families? I went back, I said, I have an idea. We should start a podcast to get information out to families. The first thing is they don't know what they don't know. I didn't know there was caregiving out there. I didn't know there was home care out there. I never even identified as a caregiver. The second thing is families don't realize that it's okay to ask for help.
How do you see AI and technology genuinely helping caregivers, and where do you think we need to be careful?
I think it is kind of a double-edged sword.
Welcome to the From Guilt to Good podcast, where we discuss all the things caregivers wish people would talk about, but don't, won't, or can't. Hi, my name is Jeanette Yates. I'm the founder of The Self-Caregiver. I cared for my own mother for several decades and now help caregivers set boundaries and use simple tools that make care and life easier so they can feel good, not guilty. Today, I'm excited to talk with someone who has become one of the leading voices in caregiving, aging, and long-term care, Lance A. Slatton of All Home Care Matters and the new president of AlzAuthors. Lance A. Slatton is known as the senior care influencer and is a writer, author, influencer, and healthcare professional with over 20 years in the healthcare industry. Lance A. Slatton is a senior case manager at Enrich Life Home Care Services in Livonia, Michigan. He is also host of the award-winning podcast and YouTube channel, All Home Care Matters, and the president of AlzAuthors. Welcome, Lance, to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you today.
Oh, thank you, Jeanette. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
So, like I mentioned in the intro, you have been one of the leading voices in the caregiving and long-term space for a while now. I like to say that you've been doing this longer than most people have even been thinking about caregivers. I always like to go back to the personal story. So I know that you have a personal story with caregiving, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about that side of things and what pulled you into this work in a deeper way.
Yeah, for many of us, it happened very unexpectedly. I like to say we plan when we're expecting our first baby, but we never plan to be a family caregiver. And that was the case for my situation. Ever since I can remember, I was preparing, planning, studying, and going towards becoming a medical doctor. And I was in the middle of that pursuit, and my wife and I, we happened to be newlyweds. She had already graduated, got her degree, and started her career. I was still in the thick of it. And one evening we were at home and got a phone call and didn't recognize the number or anything and answered it. Probably wouldn't do that nowadays though. And it was a home healthcare nurse. And she said, "Are you Lance?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, I'm so-and-so. I'm a home healthcare nurse." And I just couldn't figure out where this was going. And she said, "I'm actually been taking care of your father for the past week." And I said, "Oh, my dad. I didn't know anything was wrong." She goes, "Well, yeah, he just got discharged. He had surgery and he had fallen. He had developed a really acute bruise, and that bruise never healed because it was on his coccyx, and it developed into an abscess, and then it burst. And he had to have an emergency surgery because that infection then gets into your bloodstream. And, with my dad's case, it actually ended up into his bones. And I'm concerned he's able to properly dress, clean, and manage this wound because of the location. None of us could do it. Can he come stay with you for a couple of weeks? Or if you can't, I can have him go into rehab for a couple of weeks. Well, I said, well, yeah, of course he can come stay with us.
Couple weeks,
no problem. It'll be like a little mini vacation. The couple of weeks turned into almost 3 years. And then, during that 3 years, he had 7 major operations. And when I say major, the hospital that he had all these surgeries at is one of the leading institutes in the entire world. Now, we know I'm from Michigan, so, use some deductive reasoning to put that together. And the surgeon had been there for 40 years. And he said, "I have never in my entire career seen something this so severe." And my father ended up having part of his tailbone cut off. It was just very grotesque and very intensive. But during that entire 3-year period, Jeanette, multiple home healthcare visits, wound care nurses, physical therapy, everything you can get. But not once either in the hospital, during surgery, post-surgery, in the rehab, at home. Did anybody ever say to us, and my dad was a veteran also, and never offered resources, never said, have you looked into this? Are you aware of this? And so I got really, really overwhelmed because I'm doing some student instructing at the university. I'm working in the labs at the university. I'm the head of our medical fraternity, like all these things. And I just called my wife one day after going to have lunch with a friend. And I said, why don't we start a company where we send people out to the homes to help people like us? I go, there's got to be a lot of them out there. Not realizing,
Right.
again, I mean, it sounds naive, right? But at the same time, you don't know what you don't know. And I would think I would be as informed as anyone, especially with all the surgeries and everything we were
Right.
going through. But no one ever said, have you looked into respite care? Did you know this is available? Your
Right.
dad's a veteran. This is available. And so I think I just came up with this genius idea, like I invented the wheel. And so we started exploring that. And very quickly we realized, okay, there's an entire industry out here. Why don't we know about this? So because of that situation, I stopped my pursuit and we started our home care company. We looked at the franchises, and for us, we felt the best fit was just starting it on our own. And we've been in business now for a long time, and we really love helping people. And that's the same reason I was trying to become a physician. I just wanted to help people. And I quickly discovered this is an awesome way to really have a meaningful, impactful difference in people's lives, sometimes at their most vulnerable time too.
So that leads me into what you've built with the All Home Care Matters YouTube and everything else. I want you to talk to me a little bit more. Your platform is nationally, if not internationally, recognized show platform. Can you take us back to what made you start doing that? And how did the podcast start? How did the YouTube start? And what were you trying to accomplish? And how has that been a resource for caregivers?
Sure. So I'll take you back to the beginning of that. So around the 8-9 year mark of having our home care company, this thing happened. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called COVID. We were going all over the state of Michigan, and not just once or twice, but this was regularly and consistently with, I don't even know the number of senior living facilities, senior centers, you name it, churches, everything, because everything I was doing and my motivation, aside from helping people, was I want to help avoid what I went through of not knowing that all these great resources and this thing called home care and respites available for families. And through doing lunch with Elvis, or we do silly bingo, we would run auctions, and never taking a dime for any of it. We were doing it because I had a great time doing it, but we went to help people, and we had 9 or so caregiver support groups, again, running on a monthly basis. And we did dementia seminars. Those would be year-long courses where we were working with one of the leading dementia experts in Michigan, again, not charging a penny for these things. This was all 100% free, and educating people about caring for loved ones with dementia specifically, and caring for themselves too, which is important. Around the 9-year mark, COVID was starting to happen. And right before our governor had said, we're on lockdown, no public gathering, we made the decision ourselves for our staff and for these people coming to all of these events, because originally, at least here in Michigan, it was just going to be a 2-week bending that curve. And our company was still operating in full function. So we're getting updates from our Department of Health and Human Services, all this. And we quickly realized, maybe a little bit before the general public, that this is going to be longer than just a couple of 2-week shutdowns. So around maybe the 6-8 week mark, I'm guessing, I have a real need to help people. I don't just say it, I really try to do it. And I'm thinking, like, how can we still get this stuff out to these families? And then I happened to hear a podcast one night. I went to the track to do some exercise after my kids went to sleep. And I'm like, man, this is interesting. I thought podcasts were just like your local news or your cable channels. Again, very naively thinking it was just like regular broadcasting put into audio format. And I happened to hear a company, and it was a home care company. I'm like, oh, this is weird. I didn't know you could do this. And it was a really poor quality podcast. You could hear babies crying in the background, and it was interesting. So I went home, and much like I had told my wife, I had an idea. We should start a company to help people like us. I went back. I said, I have an idea. We should start a podcast podcast to get information out to families. I knew nothing about podcasts. I had no desire, no interest in being on YouTube or social media. And we thought we were going to do it and just do it for maybe a few months until everything gets open back up. And then we'd start all of our programming again in Michigan. And that ended up being almost 3 years for us here. But when we went to record the first episode, I then said, why don't we record it with video, not just audio? I said, because we're going to be talking and doing it and have the audio, but why not get the video? And you're only doing the work once to get double the content. And so that's how the YouTube started. And then maybe around the 6-8 month mark, we had jumped up to like over 60-some thousand subscribers. And then one of the news outlets reached out to us. And that's when I'm like, okay, this is more successful than I realized. And they wanted to do a feature about how we're helping families during the time of COVID through these resources and shows. And then it just kept snowballing from there. And just, it was pretty remarkable because I never had a desire or an intention of having it be something long term.
Well, and I think too, and it speaks to that, the care nature that you have. This is not my ideal way to help people. Like, I don't want to necessarily, but this is how it needs to be done right now. And then of course you were meeting a need. And I think another thing happened during that time, which was that even people who weren't caregivers the way you were, that I was, were like having to be caregivers to some extent. And that opened up a lot of awareness and hunger for more information. I think that also speaks to the popularity. You hit at a right time where that was a real felt need just within the caregiver community, but also worldwide. Yeah. I want to ask you, because you've been doing this for a while now, and you have had a lot of caregivers, advocates, so many different people on the podcast, on the YouTube. What are some of the biggest themes that you see caregivers are struggling with over and over? So what do you think caregivers are struggling with the most? What have you noticed?
Well, I would say, it's going to be a two-part answer, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Jeanette. The first thing is they don't know what they don't know. And what I mean by that is going all those years ago with my situation, right? I didn't know there was caregiving out there. I didn't know there was home care out there. I never even identified as a caregiver. I just said, yeah, I'm a son. I'm helping my dad,
Right.
But that's the first thing. They don't know what's out there. They don't know what's available, because even all these years later, our company still gets multiple phone calls and even emails from people. They're thinking we provide home health care, or they didn't know that home health care was even an option, where if mom and dad are living together or even just alone and they can't get that transportation safely, and it's very laborious for them to have to go to their external PT appointment or whatever the case. And in Michigan, you have the snow and the ice and everything else. And then we explain these resources, they're not getting it at the point of contact.
Right.
Is where I'm going with that. And then the second thing is, families don't realize that it's okay to ask for help. They don't want to feel guilty. They don't want to feel like they're kind of shying away from, quote unquote, their duty or responsibility as a spouse or as a child, what have you. And we explain to them, it's an extension of you caring for them by getting them the care so that you can continue doing what you're doing. And often it also allows them to feel like, I'm the wife again and not the caregiver, or I'm the son again and not the caregiver. So they can reassume that role of that familial relationship rather than a caree and a caregiver relationship. And that's very hard for families. And I feel like we're not doing a good enough job of letting them know what all is available out there for them. And I don't know how to fix that. I don't know that it's fixable from just say, an outside standpoint, that it really has to start from, more of an institutional standpoint. I had a president of one of the major European medical schools on, and, I was asking him, and he says, I teach my professors to then teach our students, like, look at the whole picture, not just the illness. Like when mom brings dad in for that checkup, take a few moments and almost treat mom like a non-medical patient. Mrs. Jones, how are things going for you? Is there anything that maybe we could connect you with? Just take that brief moment to ask that. And you'd probably be surprised at the help that they may need, but they're not going to ask the doctor because they don't feel like it's their place to ask.
So I have a 2 or 3 pronged response to all that you said, because I resonated with a lot of it, because of you mentioned feeling like if you're not doing it as the caregiver, then you're cheating in some way. Yeah. So I had that same feeling of this is my responsibility. This is my job. I have another relative. He really struggled with whether or not it was okay for someone else to do what he could technically do, but he was burnt out and exhausted and all of these things. And he was like, but this is my responsibility. To him, it was part of his vows that he made when they got married. This is something that we really carry. And to have that mindset shift, to have that someone come in and say, actually, you're still caregiving for someone, even if you delegate some of these tasks or take a break and delegate all of the tasks so that you can spend time with your family. Or sometimes I know caregivers that are like, oh, I have to get respite care for my loved one so I can go have surgery. Sometimes it's not it's not the same type of respite, but still, there is that guilt that we feel. So that's one thing that I really resonated with. And then I think too, you're right. Now we have this oversaturation of information coming at us all the time. So even if we were to get some resources handed to us on a piece of paper that said, here are the places that you can get home care, like we're in the middle of so many things, like you said, and it's probably more systematic than anything else. We're trying to get our loved one home and then we got to figure it out and all this kind of stuff. We don't remember everything that people tell us. And then we go online and we have all this information coming at us. Some of it is specifically geared towards caregivers, like your content and mine. And then others is talking about burnout for businesses or burnout for moms or burnout. And it's like, wait, what am I supposed to do here? And so I love that you have that your approach is really targeted to people and really helping them see themselves. And that layer of care for the caregiver, I think too, is something that you just highlighted. I noticed that with my mom when I didn't put her in a nursing home. We together made the decision that is what was best for her. But I remember the doctor always taking time with me when he saw my mom every day. And every day he took time to ask me, like, what are you doing here? Like, we've got this. And I'm like, we'll see. I'm going to stay for a little bit. But also he really wanted me to make sure that I was taking care of myself, my family, my career, whatever else that I had in my life, that my mom was really okay. And that took a while for me to embrace. I can let somebody else do it, but I'm going to hover. I can resonate with all of that. So I want to shift gears a little bit because you're also the president of AlzAuthors, which I love because it's created by caregivers who really understand the dementia journey. That is not something I really had to deal with until the very end of my mom's life. And so I'm not as well versed in dementia and dementia care or caregiving, but this AlzAuthors is created by caregivers who do understand. And so I love that that's part of your focus now as well. But for listeners who are not familiar, can you explain what AlzAuthors is and why do you think trusted stories and books are so important for families navigating dementia and aging?
Yeah, well, I'm give a little background here. When we started All Home Care Matters and it started to pick up, we weren't really looking for guests at the time. We were just kind of doing solo videos. And then we realized, okay, we're going to have guests, and people get tired of me anyways. But we had reached out to, AlzAuthors, because before the podcast, we were big supporters of the work they were doing. They've been around now just around 11 years, and they are the largest international resource in one location of Alzheimer's and dementia resources and books. Okay. We have over 400 independent authors. Some have gone through publishing companies, some are self-published. But at the end of the day, every book that is discoverable on the website has been vetted and reviewed in order to get that distinction of being an AlzAuthors recommended book. We recently, something that, I kind of told the ladies about before this transition and acquisition, I said, you guys, you can't find the books on the website though, because they had just rebuilt the site about 3 years ago, and they did a great job, and all the authors get to write a blog article and put their link for their book and all of this. They come on the podcast, but they don't have a library in that sense of where you can just say, okay, I want to find a book for X, Y, and Z or this author's book. Because we have some very highly distinctive authors, like President Reagan's daughter is an AlzAuthor. Maria Shriver is an AlzAuthor. And then you have just like the lady next door, the man next door is an author. And So what we recently did, we spent the last couple of months, and it was a huge undertaking. We developed and launched the first ever AlzAuthors digital library. So now you can go to the library, type in whatever situation you have,
Wow.
search by category, by author, by keywords, and then it will take you to a full page with the cover of that book, with a link to the book and a summary of the book. And then, you're off and running, and you don't have to spend time like when you go on Amazon. You
Right.
type in dementia book, you're going to get thousands upon thousands of results. Those books may not speak to your situation.
Right.
So the books are broken down by daughter caring for mother with dementia, or Lewy
So
body.
great.
It is. And so it's really, it's a one-stop hub. We have a podcast, we have articles, resources, free resources, and then the books. And I do want to emphasize, we're not even selling the books. We're giving a books this platform, and then there's a direct link to where it is on Amazon or wherever they're featuring the book at to then purchase the book. And one last thing I will say, it's an extremely rigorous vetting process. And what we're doing is we're protecting the integrity of AlzAuthors' reputation and integrity, but also the reader and that family caregiver, so that they know these books are authentic, they're legitimate, they're factual. We do have some fiction books on there as well, but nothing that's going to give you false information, false hope, false promises, not selling cures to anything, which is very important.
So I was going to say that is so important, because I think that's another issue with the saturation of information. Is there's a lot of stuff coming at caregivers all the time that says it's helpful, but may or may not be, and in some cases may actually be harmful. And so the fact that AlzAuthors is doing that, and I know obviously with any work that you do with All Home Care Matters, you do the same thing where you're vetting people, you're vetting what is going on. I think that's so important that, we have a responsibility as people who have platforms to make sure that we're sharing information that is helpful, and if at least not harmful. Sometimes you get an interview slips in there and you're like, well, I don't know how helpful that was, but maybe it wasn't.
Kind of a motto. I got a couple of mottos I really like to live by. One, if I can't help you, I don't want to hurt you. And the other is, if I don't know the answer, I'm going to find out who does.
Yes.
Because we've been approached, and I'm sure you've had the same situation with companies and products. They want to offer us a whole lot of money to get featured on All Home Care Matters. And, we look into it before we even reply. And, one of them was they were promoting the cure to Alzheimer's and dementia. And, we just politely said, thank you, but no, thank you. And they got all bent out of shape. And people like that you can't reason, or, we just said, well, we wish you well, and just moved on. We don't want to engage in conversation like that. But that's really what All Home Care Matters and AlzAuthors, especially AlzAuthors, because of the books, we are protecting, these families, and so that they can trust and have confidence in knowing any book on there is reputable and is going to be helpful and not promise anything or take advantage of people.
So that leads me directly into our next topic, this idea of being helpful, not doing any harm, right? So something I feel really passionate about as someone who used to work in technology and on social media and all of that. One of the things that I've noticed, as we all have, the amount of technology, especially AI tools, being marketed to the aging population, our caregivers, all of that stuff is really increasing. And for good reason. We need help. We need solutions. And in a lot of ways, technology can be very helpful. Sometimes it can be harmful. And so I do work making sure caregivers understand what is being marketed to them and how they can make good decisions about the technology that they use, because there are a lot of helpful tools out there. And I know that you have a front row seat to the same type of thing through All Home Care Matters. You get to see a lot of new tools, everything from new home care services to AI powered platforms. And so I want to get your broader take on AI and technology and how it helps caregivers, or if you think it does. How do you see AI and technology genuinely helping caregivers, and where do you think we need to be careful or realistic about its limits?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it is kind of a double-edged sword. I think it is helpful to both the care recipient, but also the care provider, most of the time being the family members. But it also can be dangerous. We can also put too much trust and confidence in these AI tools and technology and think, okay, so we don't have to be as attentive anymore because AI or whatever the technology is taking care of it. So I think it's a great benefit, and it can be extremely helpful and purposeful, but we also have to know like where to draw that line. What's too much? For instance, if my grandmother was receiving care, we could put some AI tools in there and even download some apps and stuff. But is that going to replace me going in and saying, hi, grandma, and holding her hand and actually having some FaceTime with her in person? It's not, it's not going to replace that emotional support aspect. I think AI is really primarily a good tool for supporting and working in tandem with the family caregiver. And it might give you a little more leeway where I'll give you an example real quick, Jeanette, if I can. We were helping a family not that long ago, and the mother lived in the country, like literal country, and the daughter lived about 45 minutes away in the city. And this was right before we started helping her. And we'd met with the daughter a couple of times. And that's a big transition for families too, having strangers come into your home. And the daughter finally made the decision to hire us because what happened, the last time I had met with her, I was explaining to her, I said, you may only want to have help 2-3 days a week for 4 or 5 hours. I go, it's really whatever you think is going to be most beneficial. I said, but what I really recommend is getting some cameras and some motion sensors in the house. And that falls under, technology as well. And she goes, I just don't know. That seems invasive. I said, well, here's the thing. She had just finished telling me that she had just a horrible experience a couple days before. She was calling her mom just to check in when she got out of work, like she always does every day, which is wonderful. And that particular day, mom never answered the phone, and she called her for like an hour straight. And I may have, if it were me,
which is a lifetime when you don't know what's going on.
Yes. Her blood pressure was through the roof. Her anxiety, I probably would have acted a little sooner, but it's not right or wrong. And she said, so I just hopped in the car and I drove right to my mom's house. Well, there's another 45 minutes and mom's still not answering the phone. She got there and mom did have moderate to going into the late stages of dementia. Mom's sitting on the front porch. Just not a care in the world. Well, what happened was mom locked herself out of the house and the phone was in the house. And so that's where I said, you really should consider getting these cameras. I said, because all you would have had to done was pulled up your cameras and you could have seen at least, if nothing else, your mom was safe.
Right.
And because she didn't want to call the police in case it was nothing, it's kind of like pick your journey and make sure you pick the right one.
It's so hard in those moments to you just make the best decision you can.
Yes. And I'm not here plugging anything, but I know you and I previously spoke about it. I work with a company called Caregiver-specific AI, and I have no problem mentioning them. And I only work with people that I fully inspect and, look up, make sure they're good and talk with them. And their service is 100% free. That's why I'm bringing it up. There is no cost. It's 100% free. And what it is, it's a fully interactive AI assistant for the family. And so she's, wonderful. They call her Cara, Cara. And, I had a conversation with Cara and I had asked her a question, and she's an isolated environment where if you go to ChatGPT or OpenAI or any of those, they pull from everything on the internet. So you may not get good information. And so what they've done with Cara is they have taken books. So this is offered to all of our AlzAuthors, and several have taken up the offer. I was the first one to submit my book, Family Caregivers Guide. And they take the digital book and they basically install it into Cara's memory. So if you're asking a question about X, Y, and Z, whatever, and it's contained in any of these books, then Cara is going to tell you, or you just need emotional support. You had a bad day. And sometimes our friends might get tired of us, complaining or,
or they just don't know it. They just don't get it.
And they don't know, and they don't know what to say. Right.
Yeah.
You can then just interact with Cara and, she's going to be just, maybe help to alleviate some of that anxiety and stress or frustration, but you're getting factual, good information. And so I see that as a wonderful tool, you know, that's directly going to benefit you and subsequently your loved one. If, you can't get dad to go to bed at 2:00 in the morning, there may be some good information that Cara can give you that you can at least try and see if that's a good solution for you.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. And I love that you pointed out one of the things that I try to let people know is when you're just using, why can't I just use ChatGPT or Gemini? And it's that has been trained on lots of different data, information, websites, whatever, but an AI tool that's specifically made for caregivers or, and has a specific knowledge base, in this case, books related to caregiving, dementia, things like that knowledge base. It's not going to go pull some wackadoo website information.
Yeah.
It's all based on either personal experience or research that has been done on something that a caregiver needs to know. And so I think that is something that when we throw around the term AI, a lot of people just say, oh, that's ChatGPT. And they just don't, there's so much that means so much. And so I love that you broke that down for everybody, because I think that's really important. And it does make me feel better knowing that tool was created that way, because it shows an effort to really meet the needs of caregivers, not just like, let's cram as much information as we can.
That's and thank you for further, breaking that down, because a lot of people think AI is just like, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, all the major ones, and those pull from every source on the internet. With what they've done with caregivercompanion.ai, she's in a closed environment. So only the information that they feed into her memory is the information that she can then, provide you with. So it's all vetted, it's all checked out, it's all sourced, versus you can go on ChatGPT today, ask it the same question that you asked it yesterday, and you could get an entirely different answer.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's very interesting in podcast world, caregiver tech world, caregiver burnout world all the time. And so like, I'm constantly steeped in technology with all of this stuff that we have to do for our work. And then I'll talk to somebody and I'll say something about AI, and somebody will say, oh, I don't use AI, I only use Google. And it's like, well, you're using AI then. It's kind of, and so just like this, I think one of the things I'm trying to do is narrow that awareness and knowledge gap. Let's make sure that we're doing that as we go through. So I love that you shared about that tool. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes, as well as all the other All Home Care Matters and AlzAuthors.
Well, and Jeanette, if I could just add real briefly to that. So if people want to reach out, they can reach out to us at All Home Care Matters or AlzAuthors, contact at allhomecarematters.com. And if they have a book and they are interested in providing that book for Kara's memory, let us know. And every author is attributed. Every book is, still protected. You own the book. You're just you're donating a digital copy. But then if somebody wants to buy the whole book, because Kara's not reading the book to you,
right?
They're taking information from all of these books that might be relevant to that person's inquiry. Then Kara then says this book was written by, Jeanette Yates, and it can be found at Amazon, whatever. So everything is attributed back to the author. The author is not losing anything.
Another difference between Kara and the rest of the big AI tools, right?
Yes.
Very, very good. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very helpful. So I could ask you, we could stay on here all day, but because we've got a lot we could talk about. But I know your time is valuable, and I want to let you go. But I do have one more question. It's kind of a fun one.
Okay.
If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about how society treats caregivers, what would it be?
I would have them recognized as one of the pillars of the healthcare community. And the reason I say that, going back to, COVID, we were kind of joking around a little bit about that earlier. During COVID, caregivers, CNAs, aides in general, they were looked at as like superheroes. We would go and put yard signs out in front of our building, just saying caregivers are the real superheroes. They were treated like heroes, but it feels like they went back to being treated like a zero after COVID. And I think it's really important to recognize the enormous role that they play in the well-being of these individuals. We're making sure, sugars are being checked, blood pressure is good, all of these things to avoid them having to go back into the hospital or having another medical situation. I just think recognizing family caregivers and professional caregivers as really the superstars that they are would go a long way, because if we don't have them, you're going to have people sleeping in hallways at nursing homes and hospitals.
The number of people that are aging or getting diagnoses, like my mom, she was diagnosed with her illness when she was 30. So some people are having to start taking care of their loved ones way earlier than they might have anticipated, or like you mentioned earlier, some of them are not even anticipating it and then it just hits them. And then there's so much that goes into family caregiving and, like you said, professional caregiving that is underappreciated. So I do think, yes, if we just had more of an understanding and appreciation for caregivers, that would make the world a better place, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
All right. Lance, thank you so much. You have been so helpful. This has been such a great conversation.
My pleasure.
Where can everybody connect with you? Give us the websites one more time, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, for the show, it's allhomecarematters.com. We have a contact form there, or you can email us, contact@allhomecarematters.com. I have my website, lanceaslatton.com. Again, contact form there, or AlzAuthors@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you if we can help in any way, or if you're interested in being a guest, or you have a book, reach out. We'd love to work with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining me today on the From Guilt to Good podcast. I will link everything he just mentioned in the show notes. And remember, if this conversation resonated with you, please share it with a caregiver in your life. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find more resources at JeanetteYates.com. And until next time, feel good, not guilty.